stream, and we will jump right in with this very, very, very special man. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for bringing your energies here today. And Hasina and I are the co-hosts of this Convergence Room. Humanity as Organism Thrives, and we are on day 96, no, 97, day 97 of our 99 days of peace through unity. And today is comfortable shelter in the progression of the 7 core needs. The 6th is comfortable shelter, and I have a feeling, Sarbmeet, you are a scientist for sure, and you definitely speak the structure of things, and in a very fun way, in a very fun and accessible way. And you know what? It occurred to me this morning. I was trying to figure out how you get what you get in your calendar, because you've done bench science, you've done corporate research work, you are an astrophysicist by training, and searching for alien life, and you do kids empowerment work, and you're teaching a brand new course with the Deep Time Network called, let me get your bio here so I get this right. Yeah, the New Cosmology, courses on the New Cosmology with the Deep Time Network, called with his quantum wisdom. So like, you are a revolutionary guy, teaching everywhere. You seem to show up all over the place. You've got awards on your CV. You have been nominated throughout the course of the cosmos, and you've got a great TED Talk, which is fun. I think we'll put the link to your TED Talk in there, Chaos to Cosmos. That's a fun one. But I am looking so forward to hearing what you've got to say, because it's I think you've been doing this since the Big Bang, and you're going to talk to us about the Big Bang. And thank you for being here in advance. We can structure this any way you want. I think lots of people will have lots of things to ask you about, but the more this guy talks, the better it gets. So I'm gonna be quiet now.
That was a lovely introduction, I must say. Yes, I am a scientist. That is, I think that is in my bones and in my blood. I think I knew that I was going to become a scientist when I was about 10 years old. And what has really happened is that a side of me that had been sort of hanging along as my science was progressing forward. I was getting my degrees and, doing whatever a scientist does, I suppose. But there was a side of me that was kind of hanging in there, wanting to be part of this. And that was, I guess I can just call it my spiritual side. And it was kind of, not getting any place in my heart until something clicked. About 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, I don't exactly remember, but suddenly my science became something much more than what I had intended it for it to be. And so, yeah, this is what makes me want to, I guess, share the ideas that crop up in my head and that I feel are something that are meaningful to our existence on this earth. So yeah, that's what I have been doing, is trying to share those ideas as widely as I can. And that was also part of the quantum wisdom course that I taught recently at Deep Time, was definitely an aspect of my desire to do that. But today we're talking about peace, and peace definitely sits right at the center of what the cosmic story is about. And I I have, I guess you might call it an insight at this point in terms of how peace connects really beautifully with our cosmic story and what I call our cosmic flow. And that is what I want to talk about today. So I have some PowerPoints that I would like to share with folks. Let me just jump right ahead and see if I can do that. Tom, it says host disabled participant screen sharing, so I need some help here.
Shamima, can you help us, please?
You should be able to share screen now.
Okay, great. You did some magic there. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. Somebody give me a positive
Yes.
sign there. Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
that's great.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, great. Excellent. So I'm going to start out by relating some quotes that I came up with as I was researching this talk, which really I think is a good entree into what I want to say here. So here we go. Peace is the result of retraining your mind to process life as it is rather than as you think it should be. This is Wayne Dyer, which he's one of my
I think you just
Made
muted.
apologies. We muted you accidentally.
No, that's okay. I think it's a good idea to mute other people because there was some noise coming in. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. So peace is the result of retraining your mind to process life as it is, which really talks about alignment. And so here's my next quote. Deep within, you know that the only thing that is truly important is being in alignment with spirit. It's also Wayne Dyer. When we align with our soul, we find peace, purpose, and power. A lot of the conflict you have in your life exists simply because you're not living in alignment. You're not being true to yourself. And the most profound insight in the history of humanity is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. This is a religious philosopher, Loyal Rue. So the point of all of these quotes is that alignment is really important, not only to achieving peace, but to also executing our sense of responsibility towards the cosmic story. Because it's only when you're aligned that you can move the story and the flow forward. So then it behooves us that we need to understand that reality that we need to be aligned with. And that reality that we need to be aligned with is the reality of our universe. And therefore, we need to understand the story of our universe if we are going to align ourselves with it and if we are going to achieve peace by doing so. So here is my intersection of science and spirituality, if you will. This is kind of what has really been one of those insights that has brought me to where I am today. And that is the idea that even though science, and that's my field, even though science has taken such amazing strides at explaining how we have come to be on this earth, and that's the cosmic story. But if anything, the science story has magnified our sense of awe and wonder. And it has not in any way taken away from, but in fact has added to the astounding miracle that this cosmos is. And that's a point I like to make rather emphatically, because there is this way of looking in our world that says that because science has been able to explain everything, that now we don't have to have any sense of mystery or awe or wonder. And I think it's really the reverse that is true here. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that while randomness and chance definitely play a role in the cosmic story, and I'm sure you've all heard about that aspect of it, species evolves because of random mutations and so forth and so on. But if you really look at the cosmic story, you cannot help but feel that there is a relentless and unstoppable desire someplace that is wanting to achieve a dream. And only then can you start to understand how a cloud of hydrogen, which is really how our universe was billions of years ago, how that cloud of hydrogen can become the things that it has become today. And what has it become today? It has become colorful butterflies. It has become beautiful, radiant flowers. And it has become what is represented by our species, our humankind, which includes things like stirring poetry, soulful music, inspiring opera, you name it. All of that has come from nothing other than clouds of hydrogen. So, knowing the cosmic story has given us a context. We know where we are situated, where we belong, and what kind of a flow we are a part of. But just knowing this part of the story doesn't tell us how we need to align with that cosmic flow. And that is the part that I want to talk about today, because that is where peace truly resides. So what is it that we are missing? If we look at our story, we basically get an idea that things are coming together to make new entities. And that's a fine thing to be able to think about in terms of our cosmic story. But there is something that we completely miss out on if we think only in terms of entities coming together to form new entities, which come together to form new entities and so forth. That, it turns out, is in some ways a part of our story, but in other ways, it is actually a way of thinking that detracts from the true meaning of what our cosmic flow is. And this way of thinking comes from our long history of Newtonian and reductionist thinking that has made us think of our universe as being made up of a collection of objects. So what do we do with a collection of objects? We take a collection of objects and we make wholes out of them. We can take a bunch of blocks and we can make a house out of it. And this was the view that was propagated for a long time, that everything is made up of smaller things, that every object is made up of tiny little atoms that are in there. And this way of thinking makes us think of these entities as essentially inert entities that do not have any animation of their own, that they're simply things that have to be put together by an agency, which then leads to the idea of there being a creator that lies outside of creation and holds sway over it. And it is this way of thinking that has made us, in terms of our own ability to stand sway over our world, as scientists, as basically as entities that can understand how everything works, that we can now stand sway over our world, and we can think of it as something that is there for us to utilize, to make new things from. So we have to find a way to get around this way of thinking that has gotten to where we are today. So I'm not going to talk about quantum theory here. That's something much deeper to go into, and something that I actually spent a whole month going over in the course that I just finished teaching. But I will tell you one of what I think is the most important things that comes out of the new paradigm that quantum physics has given us. And that new paradigm that has emerged is that wholes are not made from parts. Wholes are actually made from relationships. And therefore, every whole can be thought of as a web of relationships. And those entities that exist at the intersection of those relationships have only one purpose. And that purpose is to weave together through their relationships to make a whole. And this diagram that I'm showing you here is only intended as a way to convey this idea that a whole is actually made up of relationships. You take the relationships away and you absolutely have nothing left. There are no entities that survive taking those relationships away. And this is a whole new way of looking at things, which is very different from the Newtonian picture. And in fact, it turns out is absolutely essential to the understanding of cosmic flow. So I'm actually going to tell you the cosmic story in a new way, in a way where this idea about how wholes are made from relationships will become very clear, and it will become clear that this is really what our cosmic story is about. Here's a couple of quotes that pertain to this discovery that I'm talking about, which really came out of quantum theory. Quantum theory forces us to see the universe not as a collection of physical objects, but rather as a complicated web of relationships between the various parts of a unified whole. In the world described by quantum mechanics, there is no reality except in the relations between physical systems. It isn't things that enter into relations, but rather relations that ground to the notion of things. So relations are primary and things are secondary. Here's a couple of quotes from the founders of quantum theory. These are quantum physicists. Isolated material particles are abstractions, their properties being defined and observable only through their interactions with other systems. The world thus appears as a complicated tissue of events in which connections of different kinds alternate or overlap or combine and thereby determine the texture of the whole. So I hope you get the gist of what this discovery is about and what this paradigm really is saying. So now I come back to the cosmic story. So it turns out that our cosmic story has expanded substantially in the last couple of decades. The Big Bang Theory, as you know, is about 100 years old. But we have discovered new things that have added to that theory, which I want to talk about today. And what this new discovery tells us is that our universe started not from fragmentation, as might appear if you think in terms of a Big Bang giving up a huge exploding into a large number of particles. Our universe actually started from wholeness. And how do we know that? So the way that we have figured this out is by a process of making time go backwards to understand what must have been there before that could lead to what we have today. And it turns out that physics allows us to do that in a very effective and very insightful way. So let's start with where we are today. Our universe is filled with millions and billions of galaxies, which is what this picture is showing us. But if we go back further in time, billions of years, we find that our universe was not only smaller, but it was also much hotter. And as you increase the temperature of the universe, all of these structures that you see here in terms of galaxies start to fall apart. And what you end up is simply clouds of hydrogen and helium. And this is what this is indicating here on this picture. All the galaxies dissolve into hydrogen and helium. But what happens if we go further back in time? And the hydrogen clouds get hotter to the point where their atoms split apart. And what you then get are particles floating around. And if you continue to heat the universe even more, which basically means going back into time, what you find is that these particles merge into what can only be called radiation and energy. And so what we are left with is a universe that is filled with radiation and energy. And we don't exactly know what that would look like, but in this picture, I'm trying to depict, just a view that one can think about in terms of visualization. But this is not the end of the story. If you keep heating this universe further and making it smaller, then what you find is that even this radiation energy goes away, and we're left with empty space and time. And if you go further back in time, space and time merge together, and then eventually they disappear as well. So here is my picture of space and time merging together. And what you then get when that happens is you get a timeless reality. And this is, again, you cannot depict a timeless reality in a picture, let alone a screen. But this is just my way of saying that what you have is so abstract that it cannot be imagined, it cannot be visualized. It has no element of time left in it. It has no space, so it can't be localized. You cannot say where such a thing resides. And it can only be characterized by something that we call unified and singular wholeness. Now, as I speak, you might be thinking that, where are these ideas coming from? And this is starting to sound like what mystics have been telling us for, a long, long time. But I'm telling you that from what we understand in physics, and some of this is not completely and firmly established in our laboratories, but there is plenty of evidence to suggest that this is how our universe must have begun. And this unified and singular wholeness that I'm talking about can actually be written as a mathematical equation. I'm not going to show that to you because that won't make much sense. But believe me when I tell you that this is not an abstract, it is an abstract idea, but it is not something that is not scientific. And so this is what science has led us to. So here's a diagram to kind of give you that same picture that I've been talking about. So in this picture, that little explosion that you see at the center is what we have been calling all along as the Big Bang. And what we now find is that we can actually proceed even beyond and further back from the Big Bang. And the Big Bang basically becomes a waypoint in the way of looking at things. So really what we are finding out is the universe started out as a unified singular wholeness. And that wholeness clearly lies beyond any kind of a physical reality that we can imagine. So it's a whole new realm of reality that we're talking about. And it is that reality that can then manifest itself in all sorts of different things that come after it. And so space and time are a manifestation of this reality. Within space and time, we can then create radiation, we can create particles, energy, and eventually those particles can gel together to form galaxies. So this is the new picture that we are coming up with. So what is this wholeness, and what are the parts into which this wholeness breaks up as the universe evolves? Because clearly today we have a myriad of things in our universe. So that wholeness has transformed, it has manifested into a lot of different things. The very first thing that happens to this wholeness is that it manifests itself as 4 different forces. We call them the fundamental forces of nature. Some of them are recognizable to you, like gravitation and electromagnetic. Others, like weak and strong nuclear forces, are not so ordinarily talked about, so they might be a little bit more difficult to have an insight on or to have an idea about, but they're there. And in fact, they're absolutely essential to our universe. And so that's what happens to this unified whole, is that it breaks up into these 4 forces. And here is a diagram that kind of gives you a nicer picture of where we think we stand today. So we start, of course, with what we call the organizing principle. And the organizing principle is that piece of mathematics that I talked about that represents the wholeness, the oneness that we talked about. And then we find out through running the handle, if you will, of the universe to see what would happen as it evolves forward. We find that it starts to break up one by one into these 4 fundamental forces. And every time it breaks up, and every time a new fundamental force breaks apart from that wholeness, there is energy that is created. And this energy causes the universe to expand faster. That's one of those things that Einstein told us. And it is this expansion of the universe that appears to us like a bang. So every time a new force is released, if you will, you get a little bang. But the bang that happened when the strong force was released from the unified whole turned out to be the biggest of them all. And it was the one that caused the most amount of expansion, and during which all of the matter that we have in our universe today got created. And so we call it the Big Bang. And that is the Big Bang of the Big Bang theory. So again, some of this is very, very well established in our laboratories, and some of it, as we go further back in time, is a little bit more on the speculative side, but it is very science-oriented and educated speculation in that sense. So here we come to the main point that I want to make here. If the universe is to move towards the realization of its dream, and that is certainly the sense that we get when we think about our cosmic story, then its wholeness must be broken. how else are you going to get butterflies and flowers and poetry, right? But its wholeness is broken into entities in such a way that it leads to the creation of new wholes. And how are these new wholes created? They are created through the weaving together of the relationships that are created, the new relationships that are created. And this is the sense in which relationships are primary, because it is through real relationships that entities start to take on the appearance of a whole, okay? So now I'm going to tell you about how the whole broke into parts and how the relationship between those parts created the new wholes, and why we believe that the creation of these new wholes is a propagation of that dream that we started out with. It's in a sense that wholeness that existed at the beginning, giving guidance to the new wholes that are created in terms of where they need to go in order to keep that dream going into fruition, okay? So here are the four forces that I talked about. They all appeared from that wholeness, and they became new entities. And soon afterwards, what we got was different kinds of matter that emanated from the energy associated with these four forces. And there are three different kinds of matter that emerged. One is what we call the ordinary matter, which is the matter of our day-to-day lives. It is what everything that we get to be in contact with is made of, everything. But then there is a mysterious thing that we call dark matter, which does not emit any light, and therefore it's not visible to us, but its effects can be felt through its gravitational force. And then there is the third kind of matter, which is actually considered to be more energy than matter. And you have to understand that with Einstein, energy and matter kind of are very, very similar in what they are. And so so this is called dark energy, and it is one of those other mysterious things that we really don't know what it is. But these are the things that appear from that wholeness that we talked about. And then they in turn create their own wholeness because they interrelate to each other. They're not separate entities. They are very much connected to each other. Dark matter, for example, is attracted to ordinary matter through gravity. They're not separate things. And dark energy has similar connections as well. So this relationship between these entities gives rise to yet new wholes. And it is because of that we first get nuclei, which then become atoms, from which pretty much everything in ordinary matter that we know of is made. And then we also start to get things, even bigger wholes in a sense, and those are the stars and the planets. And so this is kind of how our universe has started to evolve from that wholeness into a new set of relationships, carrying forward, and this is the important part, carrying forward that message, carrying forward the dream to which this is all moving towards, because that dream cannot be achieved with a single step. It has to be achieved with many, many steps. But there is this thread that runs through them, which is what I call cosmic flow. So now let me give you a few examples of what it really means for this cosmic flow to propagate, for the guidance from the whole to move forward towards this dream. Basically, what that means is that individual objects in themselves are not going to be able to move the dream forward. And if you allow me to make a connection that I really want to do at the end of my talk, it is when we start to think of ourselves as individuals that we lose the capacity to propagate the guidance towards this dream. And so this is, where this difference between the idea of a whole and parts comes from. So let's take the example of a star. On the left-hand side, I show a star that is out there in space with nothing around it. This star is, in many ways of looking at it, completely impotent. this star will shine for a while. It will even create atoms inside its core, and then it will die and it will spew those atoms out, and then nothing will happen after that because there is nothing else that can happen. However, when the same star comes into relationship with other stars and creates from that relationship what we now call a whole, which is a galaxy, something completely new happens. This galaxy is now able to recycle the gas that is emitted from the death of these stars and make new stars out of them, which helps to concentrate the atoms that each star can make to the point where we get enough of those atoms that we can start to make planets running. And then you know what happens once you have planets. So it is the wholeness of a galaxy into which the relationship of the stars reside that is able to take that guidance and move it forward into the dream, if you will. Well, let's take a planet. So we have planets now as a result of the wholeness of a galaxy working on the relationships it builds between its parts. A planet by itself is just a piece of rock floating in space. It is not going to be able to produce life. However, when a planet is in a solar system, it has influences not only from its star, which gives it light and warmth, but it has influences from other planets. It has influences from comets, from asteroids. In fact, we now know an amazing truth that all of the water in our oceans actually was a result of comets hitting the Earth and melting into water. Not only that, we now know that it was our friendly big brother, Jupiter, whose gravity was able to attract those comets and throw them towards the Earth so that they could crash on Earth and create the oceans. So it is the combination, the relationship between all of these things that allows a solar system to prosper, whereby one of its planets, which happens to be in the right place, can imagine the idea of having life germinate on it. But what happens when you have life? So you create a single cell. It's a whole. It's a collection of molecules with amazing qualities. It can reproduce itself, but you leave it in the middle of an ocean and it will keep reproducing itself until all of the nutrition in that ocean is exhausted, and then everything will die. However, when it is in the context of an ecosystem where you have other elements that are interacting with this cell, then you create a chain by which this cell can complexify into multicellular organisms and eventually into organic life. So it is once again the whole working through the guidance that it's been getting all this time in order to create yet another wholes that can carry that dream forward. So it finally brings us to us human beings. So we human beings are wholes as well, undoubtedly, but we have been brought here so that the relationships that we can concoct and that we can develop can create the kinds of wholes that can propagate the dream of our universe forward. So the question that we need to ask is, what are the kinds of relationships that we need to develop in order to create the whole that can continue to keep the dream moving? So the point that I'm making here is that with this way of looking at our cosmic story, we can finally start to understand what alignment really means. So when I talk about the cosmic flow, I'm not necessarily talking about something that is time developmental, because all of what I just talked about is actually happening today. Hydrogen gas is being made into stars in every galaxy. Those galaxies are creating planets today. Those planets, we don't know where at this point, are likely sprouting life if they happen to be in the right places, and so on. So this cosmic flow is here today, and you can think about it as one whole holding the other whole within it, and giving it the guidance, and that whole holding another whole within it and giving the guidance until, you know, it comes to us human beings. And so we then have to understand what aspect of our relationship building is authentically coming from the source which started the whole thing. If we can access that guidance, then we will know what it is that we need to do. And my own belief is that that guidance comes from what we generally call our original authentic allurements. Those authentic allurements that we have inside of us is what is guiding us towards creating those new wholes that are going to move the dream forward. And that is what we need to listen to within ourselves as to what they are. And if we can find them, and by the way, sometimes it's not easy to identify what those allurements are, because there is so much going on in our world that tends to put a layer of dust on them, if you will, so that they don't become easily visible to us, because there's so much out there that wants us to develop allurements that serve the interests of certain categories or groups and so forth. And they may not be the original allurements that we come up with. So we really have to search. And this is where quietness comes in. This is where meditation comes in. It's really a search for those allurements that lie within us. And we know they lie within us because this has been the cosmic story right from the beginning. It's the wholeness propagating itself through other wholes and so forth to move its stream forward. And this is a final quote that I have from Brian Swim. So long as the notion of a passive universe has a hold on our minds, and unfortunately, this is how most of us think about the universe, we will fail to appreciate that reality comes forth out of the ongoing dynamic and creative relationships between the whole and the parts. And that's the key. So I'm going to pause here and see if folks have comments, questions, anything.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarbmeet. It's interesting. We've been using the phrase terrifying and inspiring in several contexts this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you, in several different ways, illustrated the individuation dynamic as destructive. And that's one of the things that we get here so beautifully. So thank you. I have a ton of questions for you, but let's let folks, if you don't want to speak and you have a question, please put it in the chat. We may actually have some unmute issues, so if you would like to speak, please raise your hand, and you'll receive a little host asking you to unmute prompt. And if nobody speaks, I'm gonna bend Sarbmeet's ear here. I'm grateful for Jupiter in a brand new way. That's very interesting. I had not heard that before. So
Yes.
you are, in addition to being a very, incredibly well-traveled scientist, you're a very spiritual guy, and you also do a lot of community outreach and building and essentially what would amount to personal growth and development work, right? And so inspiring people. How do you, that last point that you made about the allurements, what's one of your favorite ways to tell young people? I know you do outreach in the schools. What's one of your favorite ways to tell people to basically follow their dreams, follow their gut?
So one of the things that I like to say is, and one of the things that I observe is people struggling a lot. It's as if there is something that they're out to get, and they have this feeling that if they don't get it, something isn't going to be complete, or something is not going to be the way that they have it be. My message to folks is kind of simple, I guess, in the sense that you don't need to struggle. You don't need to. You don't even need to put in a huge amount of effort. You don't need to become an activist. You don't need to, take a flag out and tell people everything that is right and everything that is wrong. What you really need to do, if you want to find that alignment with the cosmic flow, is to look inside for what comes naturally to you, what sort of comes up from within you that wants you to do certain things, and to do it in a way that you can sense. And I think it's something that you can sense. If you know that there is authenticity in whatever allurement bubbles up inside of you, you know it. You know it, that this is not something that has been simply created by conditioning or by people trying to sell you some stuff and so forth, that it's really coming from inside of you. And I think if you take that and follow it, then you have alignment, and there's no struggle involved. There's actually, instead of a struggle, what is involved is a letting go, because there is so much that we have in our lives that wants us to, keep doing certain things, keep making these efforts. And so if you're able to let go and start to clear out all of that stuff that is standing in front of you, then you just relax. And that is where peace comes in. I mean, that's what peace is, in my view, is when you can identify those allurements and simply relax in them. And if they're allurements, they are your passions. They're what you really love to do.
Do you think that in the grand dance that is an inevitable? It looks so many great metaphysicians who are footed in science and find new metaphors, speak of a certain inevitability. And by the way, I also, Glenn asked Dr. Kanwal, could you explain the term inexorability? So I'm using the word inevitability because I'm
it's the same word.
Type.
And inexorability, I know I used it somewhere on one of my slides. It's basically the relentlessness that I talked about. I mean, if you look at the cosmic story, you really get this feeling of inexorability. The universe finds a way, to move towards this dream. I mean, there are so many stories that I can go into, which are parts of the cosmic story that essentially illustrate this point, but I don't want to spend too much time there.
Well, as a follow-up to your previous explanation about how you would talk to young people, do you believe that human being is in a place where it's inevitable that we will bust free of this cocoon here and all be following our dreams pretty soon?
I wish I could say that. No, certainly not. So, one of the amazing things about the cosmic flow that I feel is that while it has an inexorability to it, an inevitability to it, that is only there if you look at it as a whole. You know that the cosmic flow is going to move. I mean, let's face it. Millions and millions and millions of species have gone extinct on this earth. That did not stop the flow. In fact, it enabled the flow in some ways to move in the direction that it needed to move in. So if you start looking at individual entities and talk about inevitability from that perspective, and that's kind of what we human beings are, then no, there is no guarantee that we are going to learn our lessons and we're going to move on. And this is pretty much how all of life is. If you think about it, there are no guarantees anywhere, which in some ways makes life more interesting and worth living, I would say, in a way. But the cosmic flow, yeah, the cosmic flow will achieve its dream, I think, if not through us, then through some other set of aliens in some other galaxy who maybe wake up a little faster than we do. So yeah, that's what I mean by inevitability.
Well, your talk was just amazing. It's mind-blowing to think about that, and the whole concept of isolation versus relationships. Isolation equals death. And then I think of these past 2 years, and we need to build relationships. And in one way, it really stunted growth, but in another way, we've learned to build relationships across the globe.
Yeah.
So that was amazing.
Yeah, and thank you, Hasina, for your kind comments. And I want to emphasize also that when I say relationships, I'm not necessarily talking about relationships between individuals, and of course that is an important part, but relationships with our ideas, relationships with our allurements, relationship with institutions, even in some ways, and all of that constitutes the building of a whole. It's
That was
complex.
that was one of my favorite of your early comments. We were talking earlier today about personal sovereignty, and is there a sense of personal accountability in identifying what your why is in the first place, and then saying X producing X. And I wrote down this is going to become one of my mantras. Your quote was, "Execute our responsibility to word the cosmic story."
Yeah, I don't even remember saying that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
What does it mean to you in that sense of people claiming a new version of personal sovereignty?
Pretty much what I've been talking about. Executing our responsibility is to authentically look for our allurements, not to neglect that. And yes, we need sovereignty to do that, because guess what? There's a million things out there that would love to impose on our abilities to find those authentic allurements. And I can rattle off tons of those things right out there, everybody can, that are stopping us from doing that. And the only way that we have a chance of being able to access those allurements is if we not only accept, but if we take our sovereignty back, if you will, right? We have exceeded our sovereignty to everything out there, to the media, to to politics, you name it. And if we want to be able to authentically seek those allurements, then we need that sovereignty to begin with, because without that, our journey is going to be just that much more difficult. So yes, sovereignty is the key. It's really important, and unfortunately, there is kind of less and less of it the more I look at the world today.
I think someone was starting to ask a question. The settings are changed, so you can now unmute. Who wanted to ask a question?
Oh, good.
I do.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, Sarbmeet, you talk about the dream.
Yes.
That pushes things into the cosmic flow, but who is the dreamer? How can we imagine? Is it the same as God? Is it primal force? How do you imagine it?
Okay. Yeah, that's of course a very good question. So one of the things that, I don't know whether this answer is going to be satisfactory, Anita, or not, but this is how I think about it. We have fallen into a way of thinking, which is peculiarly our own, which of course is very difficult for us to get away from, because that is how we grow up, that is how we are conditioned.
Mm.
And that is the idea that there has to be an agency which propagates these things, or which, for example, you're talking about a dream. So the question is, we assume that there's got to be a dreamer that is dreaming the dream,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
What if the dream is just there, and if we accept it as such, and if we are willing to embrace the mystery that hangs around some of the questions that we would love to know the answers to, right? Let me give you an example, right? We have, for example, been lured into believing, and this is a belief that's even stronger than the one that I'm talking about right now. We have been lured into believing that everything has a cause.
Mhm.
And so when we see something, we always look for causes and we say, oh, where's the cause for this? So if this happened, then where's the cause? And this is another sort of an enlightenment that comes from quantum theory, that causality is not a given. That causality is in fact something that emerges from a underlying theory that has no causality in it. Quantum theory is not causal, it is spontaneous.
Mm. Mm.
Things happen for
Mm.
no reason at all. For no
I
reason.
think this is a wonderful, wonderful answer. It's
Okay.
something I can just think about, and it sounds good.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Yeah, and I know that there are questions around this which haven't come up, and I'm kind of glad they're not, because they get us into even deeper, and that those are questions about consciousness, and is there a consciousness that creates these dreams? And when it comes to these kinds of questions, I take on a training that I have learned from my science, and that training tells me that only make those assumptions that are absolutely necessary in order for you to be able to understand something. Don't make any assumptions that are greater than what you need to understand it. And that kind of sometimes really helps me to not go where my mind would love to go, partly because of my own scientific upbringing. I mean, scientists look for causes everywhere. But there is something to this.
Yeah, that sounds like part of the gift of quantum theory.
Yes, I think it is, exactly. Yeah.
You can give us all the gift of freedom from our own personal greed as bipeds. You don't have to be a scientist to want more and more, right? Sarbmeet, we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Do you mind staying? Lisa has her hand up. Do you mind staying for another 2
Oh, yeah.
minutes?
Oh, yeah, I have my time, especially for Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I preceded you and used your quote about the whole, that if we're not orienting toward the whole, what will happen? Boy, there's so much that you say. When I raised my hand, it was really just to endorse this idea of that the dream is there and that we get to play in it, really. And what you just said about that we don't need to know the cause. I think I've really changed a lot because in my field as a therapist and being trained in deep psychology and looking at causes, and certainly there's a lot to be helped with that. But as I've shifted my practice to more of this orientation of, and your quote at the very beginning of what is the reality is, and what can be peaceful is if we're dialing into what are our allurements right now. Then we are participating. Then we're going to form relationships, and relationships are going to be formed with us. And in addition, last night I mentioned this in the other group that Stephen Martin, you were there, right? And when he said about if we're feeling stuck, we're probably not identifying with enough of the whole, greater
Mm.
context.
Yes.
So I think what you're saying is that this dream is always here.
Mm-hmm.
It's always available.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. That's it's there. It's always there. And this is kind of an interesting thing that you point out, Lisa, because we have this idea, especially from Western philosophy, that something has to transform into something else. And when it transforms into something else, what it started out with is lost. And then you have something else, right? But there's another way to think, which is more Eastern thought, and that is that something can manifest a new thing. But in manifesting that new thing, it doesn't disappear. It remains as the essence of everything that follows from it. And in that sense, the wholeness that we talked about, the wholeness didn't go away when it broke up into four forces and so forth and so on. It was always there. It is always there. It is there now. And it's providing its guidance in that sense. So you see what I'm trying to say? It's the essence of the wholeness is always there.
Mhm.
And the flow is not necessarily a time developmental one. The flow is one that simply goes from one hole into another hole, into another hole, into another hole. The whole on theory, as they say. So yes, that's a good way to look at it. Thank you.
And thank you, Sarbmeet.
Oh, thank you as well. Thank you as
I
well.
wouldn't be me if there wasn't you. So
Oh, thank you very much. And I see Josh has a question, and I'm happy to answer it if there's time to do that.
Sarbmeet,
Yes, Josh.
extraordinary. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a little loud background, but I just want to emphasize alignment. I was so glad that was such an emphasis, because my experience is with alignment, then everything you have access to creation. And
Exactly.
And our natural impulse, I mean, the universe is expanding. So if we're aligned with,
Yeah.
and to me, it's sun and earth, sun, creation, then we're in alignment, and then we're out of the box, and we're just in creation land, and then we can tap into all those resources.
Yeah. So well said, Josh. And I've heard several authors speak in that way, that when we are aligned, then we have access to all of the creativity of the universe.
Yes.
Because we're in the flow, and it is that same creative impulse that has propagated through all these 14 billion years.
Yes. I'm going to just say one more thing, because for me to embody that, it necessitates, and my body wants to be in flow. It wants to dance. It wants to move freely. It wants to be in nature. To allow myself, give myself permission to embody the creative and the openness of existence. Thank you so much for scientifically showing that.
Thank you,
Josh,
John.
you
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
You just embodied synchronicity, and as you said, it's the flow, it's the dance. And check out the recording of last session. Lisa showed a video of her dancing with the tree, and she had just put in the text "dancing in the flow."
Wow.
And you spoke it.
Well,
So,
I couldn't hear it because I was at a dance, my Thursday morning dance.
There you go.
Yes,
Perfect.
Yes.
I just want to end by saying that Lisa does that. I know her well. Josh does that. It's just amazing how he comes into the flow. And the other place where I always see that happen is with my grandson. He's always dancing. Even when there is no music, he's dancing. And that's the beauty that I think we lose as we keep growing up.
Have to be as little children.
Yes, exactly.
What's fun?
True. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for dancing with us today, Sarbmeet. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for being there.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Peaceful night all.